DoT has been very lackluster in general, and being part of Nihility, I think there are a bunch of issues that hold Kafka back, even though she got a pretty massive buff. Nihility is so bad that one of the biggest changes for Kafka is allowing her to give the team a 100% attack boost when they have 75% effective rate, turning her into some sort of pseudo harmony unit. Or the other big changes is allowing her follow-up attack to proc DOTs and expanding her DOT on the skill to being Blast, which I feel should have been there from the start. They also increased the multiplier for the DOT proc on her ultimate, but I think another very good change is that her follow-up attack can now be used up to twice and can be regenerated from both taking a turn and using her ultimate. This allows Kafka to do some really crazy stuff like one-turn ultimates with tutorial with a little bit of RNG. And because the ultimate regenerates the follow-up, Kafka can proc more DOT while also helping to regenerate her ultimate again, and as a result increases the frequency of DOT massively. But even with these really good buffs, I found Kafka to be quite underwhelming. I actually couldn't really believe myself, so I redid my calculations a few times just to make sure. The highest calculated team is only about 20,000 TPAV. For some reference, Jingliu and Blade with similar cost team was around 30,000. Finon with mostly 2 target and just 1 counter at 4 targets is around 40,000 TPAV, or twice of what the current Kafka team can do. I think Kafka isn't really the problem though, but DoT as a mechanic is incredibly underwhelming. It loses a multiplier for free because it cannot crit, so DOTs just deal half or even less damage than traditional crit damage with the same attack multiplier. Furthermore, Nihility units have to build extra effective rate, so there is a higher chance their debuffs or abilities can even land on the enemy, and this will be removed by bosses when changing phases. This is honestly very frustrating because not only do DoT units deal less damage, they also have oversaturated buffs as a result because there are less ways to increase their damage, meaning a lower damage ceiling while also having the opportunity cost of building effective rate. While Harmony units can apply debuffs like vulnerability for free, like 3B, and that is probably why Kafka gives a 100% attack boost now. Unfortunately, Nihility units other than Akron or Cypher are almost always playing at a disadvantage, and this shows even in Kafka's teams. Which is why I really think we are getting a new DoT unit soon. I just don't see how Kafka at this level of performance can be considered a success and released live if this wasn't the case. But even then, this theoretical new DoT unit probably needs some really crazy kit just to make up for the natural damage loss DoT has. And if this theoretical kit doesn't have some way to increase the ceiling for DoT teams, then it's just a short-term solution. We will most likely run into the same problem in the longer run again. Which is why for my current verdict at E0S1, I believe Kafka to be at best tier 2 or probably even lower for most general content. Keyword is most general content. If they give you great DoT buffs like the next Memory of Chaos or Flame Reaver Apocalyptic Shadow stage, DoT teams will be very meta relevant because the buffs are insane for that specific content and can go up to tier 0.5 or even tier 0. I think Kafka really needs a new DoT and support mixed into one kit to be able to elevate the team to even a competitive level, not even a top tier level. Hence, for updated builds and Eidolons, I think a lot can change very soon, so I most likely have to recalculate everything again. So be sure to check back again when Kafka gets a new better teammate. But for now, her updated Eidolons was calculated without Robin because I wanted to better show off the damage increase in the Eidolons, but unfortunately the damage drops drastically. However, the results that we get from the increase in damage should be pretty similar, with E1, E4 and E6 being pretty decent damage boosts. For light cones, patience is all you need is in fact not best in slot anymore. Xiao Qiu's light cone is insanely strong even though I didn't convert more effective rate to attack percentage, which would make the build more efficient. Just from the extra vulnerability alone, it outperforms every other light cone, followed closely by Cypher S1 and Tutorial S5, and then followed by patience is all you need. The new Battle Pass S3 is kind of a budget version of Xiao Qiu's Light Cone as it provides some vulnerability, so it performs very well too, followed by Resolution, Showtime, Good Night Sleep Well, and Eyes of the Prey. I unfortunately do not think Kafka's signature will be best in slot even in the future if she does get a better DoT teammate, because elevating her team's damage is most definitely better than a little extra speed and a small 60% DoT multiplier, even if it has an additional 24% damage boost. Anyways, for relic sets, I genuinely recommend Eagle and Prisoner for the 4-piece sets, and then Revelry, I think. the new 2-piece relic set for DoT, and then do Shaka, Sprightly, or maybe even Glamour as you are transitioning to the new DoT set. For now, I still found Revelry to deal more damage than Lushaka, probably because Black Swan is already very overcapped on attack percentage. This can change in the future though. For Eagle versus Prisoner, it's dependent on both team setup and content. For example, if I'm using Robin in Memory of Chaos and I'm clearing in 0 to 1 cycles, it's really hard to use Eagle, or rather it can even be completely useless because if Kafka outs before Robin, the advance is wasted, and if she outs after Robin, the action value will be reset the next wave. However, for Apocalyptic Shadow and Pure Fiction, Eagle is incredibly strong and should be the go-to build. You can actually still use Eagle in Memory of Chaos as well if you are not using Robin, but right now Robin is the best team in Memory of Chaos. The speed tuning for Eagle in Memory of Chaos, by the way, is 167.7 or rounded up to 167 speed. This gives 3 turns in 150 action value with 2 ultimates, but is honestly pretty hard to do. You most likely need really good speed substats, run May, or E4 with patience is all you need in order to achieve this more easily. And for effective rate, Kafka needs 75% to give herself the 100% attack boost, as she only requires 66.7% to already guarantee the debuff, so you are technically wasting some effective rate, but at least she gets a 100% attack boost. Finally, for teams, I think right now a double DoT team is the best, because the other Harmony supports are just way better than 4-star DoT units. Robin and 3B are incredibly strong in their respective game modes. Robin is really good for Memory of Chaos and Apocalyptic Shadow, and 3B is really good in Pure Fiction and can sometimes be very strong in Apocalyptic Shadow and Memory of Chaos as well if there are multiple enemies. However, if there are 2 enemies or less, Robin should be the better third slot, especially with the new effective rate Robin build. For Black Swan, I still believe Fast Swan to be much better because she is Nihility and needs to reapply her debuffs at times. I actually already find it to be quite awkward at times, even with a Fast Swan, because I need her to apply defense reduction so Kafka can make use of tutorial or just deal more damage. Hopefully there is some sort of solution to this in the future, because the starting rotation of DoT teams right now feel very awkward. Anyways, I have some gameplay on some stages with very good DoT buffs, so enjoy.